A 4-year-old boy playing in the dirt. His grandmother inside the house. 30 minutes later, he's gone. Vanished. No trace, no footprints leading away, no clothing left behind. Nothing. This isn't a story from decades ago. This happened in September 2025, 2 months ago. And despite one of the largest searches in South Australian history, 470 square kilometers combed by military personnel, Aboriginal trackers, police divers, and helicopters equipped with infrared technology, Gus Lamont remains missing. Welcome to Cold Case Desk. I'm your host, and today we're examining a disappearance that has baffled investigators, devastated a family, and raised questions that may never be answered. Before we begin, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's dive in. September 27, 25. A Saturday evening in the Australian Outback. Oak Park Station, a 60,000-hectare sheep property in South Australia's mid-north region. It's remote, isolated, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor might be kilometers away, where cell phone coverage doesn't exist, and where the landscape stretches endlessly in every direction. At approximately 5 o'clock in the evening, 4-year-old Gus Lamont is playing outside the family homestead. He's building something in a mound of dirt, doing what 4-year-olds do. He's wearing a gray sun hat to protect him from the sun, a cobalt blue long-sleeve t-shirt with a yellow minion character on the front, light gray pants, and boots. His blonde, curly hair catches the late afternoon light. Inside the house, his grandmother, Shannon Murray, is caring for Gus and his younger brother, Ronnie, who's approximately 1 year old. Gus's mother, Jessica, and his other grandmother, Josie Murray, are about 10 kilometers away on the property, tending to sheep. It's a working sheep station. This kind of separation is normal. The property is massive, 150,000 acres. You can't watch every corner of it at once. At approximately 5:30 in the evening, Shannon goes outside to call Gus in for dinner. But Gus isn't there. The mound of dirt where he was playing sits undisturbed, but Gus is gone. Shannon searches the immediate area around the homestead. She calls his name. Nothing. She searches further. Still nothing. By now, the sun is getting lower in the sky. Sunset on September 27 was at 6:15 p.m. That means they have less than an hour of daylight left. Jessica and Josie are called back from tending the sheep. The family begins a frantic search of the property. They're calling Gus's name into the growing darkness. They're checking sheds, checking dams, checking every building and structure on the property. 3 hours pass. 3 hours of searching in darkness, using flashlights and vehicle headlights to illuminate the vast emptiness of the outback. At approximately 8:30 p.m., the family contacts police. Gus Lamont is officially reported missing. Now, before we go further, I need to address something important. You might see different dates reported for this case online. Some sources say September 2024. That's incorrect. All verified official sources, including South Australia police statements and reputable news organizations, confirm this disappearance occurred on September 27, 2025. This is a very recent case, approximately 2 months old as we record this in December 2025. Why does this matter? Because it means this investigation is active, ongoing. The search for Gus Lamont is happening right now. Task Force Horizon, the dedicated police unit handling this case, continues to pursue multiple lines of inquiry. This isn't a cold case yet, but it's heading in that direction unless something breaks. Let's talk about who Gus Lamont is. 4 years old. Described by family as shy but adventurous. He's a good walker, capable, and confident for his age. But here's something important. According to everyone who knew him, Gus had never left the family property alone before, never wandered off, never given his family reason to worry that he might just walk away. So what happened that Saturday evening? That's what we're here to explore. When South Australia police received the call at 8:30 p.m. on September 27, they respond immediately, and I mean immediately. This isn't a case where they wait 24 hours or tell the family he probably just wandered off. They understand the situation. A 4-year-old child missing in the Australian outback at night. Every minute matters. Within hours, a Polair helicopter equipped with infrared technology is in the air, scanning the property. Infrared can detect body heat signatures in darkness. If Gus is out there, huddled somewhere in the cold night, the technology should find him, but it doesn't. By early Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after Gus was reported missing, the search operation explodes in scale. We're talking about over 100 police officers deployed to Oak Park Station, 48 Australian Defence Force personnel, more than 30 state emergency service volunteers arriving daily. Aboriginal trackers, some of the best in the world at reading terrain and following trails. Police divers. Sniffer dogs trained in human tracking. Trail bikes. All-terrain vehicles. Mounted police units on horseback. This is not a small operation. This is one of the largest missing persons searches South Australia has ever conducted. The searchers are covering every inch of the property. They're walking in line formations, shoulder to shoulder, so nothing gets missed. They're checking every building, every shed, every vehicle. They're searching water sources, dams, tanks, troughs. They're searching dry creek beds where a small child might have fallen. They're covering ground, methodically and exhaustively. And they're finding nothing. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no piece of clothing, no hat, nothing. On September 30th, 3 days after Gus disappeared, senior police officers meet with the family. It's not a conversation anyone wants to have, but they have to be honest. Medical experts have provided advice about survival timeframes for a 4-year-old child in these conditions. The September temperatures in this region can range dramatically hot during the day, cold at night. A small child, without food, without water, without shelter, faces extremely limited survival odds. The police tell the family there is little hope of finding Gus alive. Let that sink in. 3 days. That's all it took for this to shift from a rescue operation to something else. Something darker. On October 3rd, 6 days after Gus vanished, the operation officially shifts from rescue to recovery. Police issue a statement. No tangible pieces of evidence, such as footprints, a hat, or clothing, have been located. Think about that. 6 days of intensive searching, hundreds of personnel, advanced technology, Aboriginal trackers who can follow trails most people would never see, and they found nothing, not a single piece of physical evidence that Gus Lamont was ever outside that homestead. Also on October 3rd, the family releases Gus's photograph to the media. This is significant. In missing persons cases, photographs are released immediately within hours to maximize public awareness and potential sightings. But in this case, it took 6 full days. The family would later face criticism on social media for this delay, but we need to be careful about judging. Families in crisis don't always make decisions the way outsiders think they should. Shock, trauma, grief, these things cloud judgment. On this same day, South Australia Police establishes Task Force Horizon. This is a dedicated investigative unit comprising 12 specialists, search coordinators, medical specialists, survivability experts, and experienced detectives. The case is transferred to the Missing Persons Investigation section of Major Crime. This tells us something important. Police are considering possibilities beyond a simple wandering child scenario. Let me paint a picture of Oak Park Station for you, because understanding the location is crucial to understanding this case. Oak Park Station sits approximately 40 to 43 kilometers south of a tiny township called Yunta. Yunta has a population of about 85 residents. It's got a hotel, a couple of roadhouses, a post office, and a police station. That's it. Beyond Yunta, you're looking at roughly 315 kilometers northeast of Adelaide, South Australia's capital city. That's a 3.5 to 4 hour drive on good roads. But Oak Park Station isn't on good roads. Access to the property is via deteriorating dirt tracks. During the search operations, multiple vehicles, police cars, media vehicles, volunteer vehicles experienced flat tires, got bogged in sand, broke axles. The Daily Mail reporter covering the story specifically mentioned that several Australian Defence Force trucks got separated from their convoy because the sand kicked up by vehicles was so thick they literally lost sight of each other. This is harsh country. Semi-arid pastoral land. The property covers 60,000 hectares. That's 150,000 acres. To put that in perspective, that's about 231 square miles. It's massive. The kind of property where you can drive for an hour and still be on your own land. The terrain is classic Australian outback, scrubby vegetation including saltbush, bluebush, mulga trees, and scattered gum trees. Dry creek beds cut through the landscape, dangerous for a small child because they create dips and valleys that aren't visible from a distance. The region receives less than 180 millimeters of rainfall annually. It's drought country, it's sheep country, it's tough country. The property has several water sources. A large dam, 600 meters from the homestead, 4.5 meters deep, holding 3.2 million liters of water. Additional smaller dams scattered across the property. Water tanks, stock troughs, each one a potential hazard for a small child. But here's something that investigators didn't initially know about. Abandoned mine shafts. Oak Park Station, like much of this region, has a history of copper mining. Old, uncovered, unfenced mine shafts dot the landscape. Some are shallow enough that you can see the bottom. Others are 20 meters deep dark holes in the earth that could swallow a child without a trace. We'll come back to these later, because they become a critical focus of the investigation. The wildlife in this region includes venomous brown snakes, among the deadliest snakes in the world. Foxes, kangaroos, emus, wombats, and wombat burrows are another hazard. Deep tunnels that a child could potentially crawl into and become trapped. Now, you might be thinking, what about dingoes? Australia has a long, dark history with dingoes and children. The Azaria Chamberlain case, in 1980, "A Dingo Took My Baby," is seared into the Australian consciousness. But dingoes are unlikely here. Oak Park Station lies within what's called the dog fence, a 1,540-kilometer-long fence specifically designed to keep dingoes away from sheep farming areas. Sheep farmers in this region shoot dingoes on sight. They're considered vermin. There's one more detail about the landscape that's important. During the extensive searches, observers noted something significant. No birds of prey were circling. In the outback, when something dies, raptors, eagles, hawks, wedge-tailed eagles circle overhead. They're attracted to carrion. The absence of circling birds suggests that if something happened to Gus, his remains aren't exposed on the surface where birds could detect them. The property has virtually no cell phone coverage. This is important for the investigation. In modern missing persons cases, investigators rely heavily on cell tower data, phone pings, location tracking, digital footprints. But out here, nothing. No towers, no data, no electronic trail to follow. The nearest major road is the Barrier Highway, approximately 45 kilometers from Oak Park Station. That's significant because it limits the possibility of stranger abduction. Anyone driving to Oak Park Station has to navigate rough tracks for 45 kilometers. You can't just happen upon this property. You have to know it's there and deliberately drive to it. So we've got a massive property, harsh terrain, multiple hazards, limited access, no cell coverage, and a 4-year-old boy who vanished without a trace in the 30 minutes his grandmother was inside the house. Let's talk about the timeline more carefully, because timing is everything in this case. Gus was last seen at approximately 5 p.m., playing on a mound of dirt outside the homestead. His grandmother Shannon saw him. This is confirmed. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Shannon goes outside to call him for dinner. He's gone. 30 minutes. That's the window. What can a 4-year-old do in 30 minutes? Survivability experts consulted by police estimate that a 4-year-old child in good health, in familiar terrain, could potentially walk 3 to 8 kilometers over the course of 3 days. But we're not talking about 3 days. We're talking about 30 minutes. Maybe an hour at most if we're generous with the timeline. At a normal walking pace, a 4-year-old might cover 1 to 2 kilometers in 30 minutes. Maybe. But that's on flat, clear ground. This is rough, outback terrain with scrub, uneven ground, and obstacles. And Gus was described as shy. Shy children don't typically wander far from home. They don't strike out into unknown territory alone. The family searches for approximately 3 hours before calling police at 8:30 p.m. Some observers have questioned this delay. 3 hours is a long time to wait before calling for help when a 4-year-old is missing. But let's be fair to the family. They know this property. They live here. Their first instinct is to search the immediate area themselves. They're calling his name, checking buildings, checking familiar spots where Gus might have gone. It's only after exhausting those possibilities that they realize they need professional help. But here's what that 3-hour delay means. By the time police arrive, it's been at least 3.5 to 4 hours since Gus was last seen. That's 3.5 to 4 hours for any footprints to be obscured by wind. 3.5 to 4 hours for Gus to potentially travel further from the homestead if he was wandering. 3.5 to 4 hours for any potential abductor to get far away from the property. Evidence degrades with time. Trails go cold. Literally. There's another detail about that timeline that investigators have noted, though they haven't commented on it publicly. Gus's father, Joshua Lamont, lives separately from the family. He's at a property in Balalia North, near Jamestown, approximately 100 kilometers away. According to multiple news reports citing unnamed sources, Joshua learned his son was missing when police woke him up at his home, hours after the disappearance. Hours after. Not immediately, when the family discovered Gus was gone. Not during their 3-hour search of the property. Hours later, after police had already been notified and were responding to the scene. Now, there could be completely innocent explanations for this. Maybe Joshua and Jessica's relationship is strained. Maybe there was confusion in the chaos. Maybe the family was focused on searching and didn't think to call him immediately. But it's one of those details that stands out. In most families, when a child goes missing, both parents are notified immediately, often before police are called. The fact that Joshua wasn't informed until police showed up at his door raises questions. Those questions multiply when you learn about reported family tensions. According to a family friend quoted in media reports, Joshua doesn't think it's safe for the kids to be out there at Oak Park Station. The friend said, "It's dangerous." What did Joshua consider dangerous? The remoteness? The hazards on the property? Something else? We don't know. Joshua hasn't made any public statements. He hasn't spoken to media. And police say the family, including Joshua, has been fully cooperative with the investigation. But tension within a family is always relevant in missing persons cases, even if that tension has nothing to do with the disappearance. Let's talk about the family structure, because it's complicated, and it's been the subject of intense speculation online, much of it unfair and unwarranted. Shannon and Josie Murray own Oak Park Station. They inherited it from Shannon's parents, Vincent and Claire Pfeiffer. Vincent was a World War II hero, a prisoner of war on the Thai-Burma Railway, the infamous Death Railway, built by Allied POWs under brutal Japanese occupation. He survived that hell and returned to Australia to build a life on this sheep station. His daughter Shannon grew up here. It's her home, her heritage. Shannon married someone who was known as Robert at the time. They built a life together on this property. They had a daughter, Jessica, Gus's mother. But at some point, reports suggest, after the death of Shannon's father, Vincent Robert began transitioning. Robert is now Josie. Josie is transgender. And this detail has become a lightning rod for speculation, conspiracy theories, and ugly commentary online. Let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no evidence that Josie's gender identity has any connection whatsoever to Gus's disappearance. None. Police have not suggested it. Investigators have not mentioned it. It's completely irrelevant to the facts of this case. But online sleuths and armchair detectives have latched onto it, spinning wild theories and making accusations without evidence. It's shameful, it's harmful, and it distracts from the real questions we should be asking. What we know is this: Shannon and Josie still live together at Oak Park Station. Whether their marriage is intact in a traditional sense is unclear and frankly none of our business. They co-own the property. They both live there. According to sources in the nearby township of Yunta, the community has been accepting of Josie's transition. This isn't a source of local scandal or drama. Jessica Lamont, Gus's mother, also lives at Oak Park Station with her two sons, Gus and Ronnie. Jessica is described as introverted and shy, rarely seen in Yunta. She keeps to herself. This is not unusual for people living on remote properties. The isolation suits some personalities. They prefer the quiet, the solitude, the distance from urban bustle. Jessica's relationship with Joshua Lamont, Gus's father, is described as a commuter relationship. Joshua is a former frontman of an Adelaide country band called the Cut Snakes. He lives separately at Bellalia North, but reportedly travels between his home and Oak Park Station to see his family. How often? We don't know. What the exact nature of their relationship is? We don't know. But they're described as still being a couple, just living apart. This living arrangement has also fueled speculation. Why doesn't Joshua live at Oak Park Station with his partner and children? Is there conflict? Is there something wrong? But again, let's be realistic. Plenty of couples live apart for work reasons, for personal reasons, for financial reasons. It's not inherently suspicious. What is confirmed is that family friend quoted earlier saying Joshua doesn't think it's safe for the kids at Oak Park Station. That's a tension point. That's worth noting. Because if Joshua had concerns about safety and those concerns were dismissed and now his son is missing, that's going to weigh on him. And it's going to weigh on investigators' assessment of family dynamics. On September 30th, 3 days after Gus disappeared, family friend Bill Harbison delivered the family's only formal public statement to media. Here's what he said. "We are devastated by the disappearance of our beloved Gus. This has come as a shock to our family and friends, and we are struggling to comprehend what has happened. Gus's absence is felt in all of us, and we miss him more than words can express. Our hearts are aching, and we are holding on to hope that he will be found and returned to us safely." That's it. That's the only official statement the family has made. They haven't done press conferences. They haven't appealed to media. They haven't gone on camera pleading for Gus's return. And this, too, has been criticized. In high-profile missing persons cases, we're used to seeing parents in front of cameras, tearfully begging for their child's safe return. We saw it with Cleo Smith's parents in Western Australia. We saw it with William Tyrrell's family in New South Wales. It's become almost expected. The public wants to see emotion, wants to see that the parents are doing everything possible to find their child. But not everyone handles crisis the same way. Some families retreat, they shut down, they can't face cameras, they can't perform grief for public consumption, and we need to be careful about judging that. What police have said consistently is this: the family is cooperating fully. They've answered questions, they've provided access to the property, they've submitted to interviews. A victim contact officer has been assigned to support them. By all official accounts, they're doing what they need to do to help the investigation. Since that September 30th statement, the family has been silent. They've asked media to stay away from Oak Park Station. They've requested privacy, and they've made that request emphatically. On October 31st, grandmother Josie Murray confronted reporters who entered the property. She came out with a shotgun, not uncommon in rural Australia, where firearms are tools for farming and pest control, and shouted at the journalists, "Get out, you are trespassing." Was that an overreaction? Maybe. But imagine your 4-year-old grandson is missing. You're being pilloried online. Conspiracy theorists are accusing you of involvement. And now media crews are driving onto your property uninvited. How would you react? The family wants to be left alone. And they have that right. The initial search ran from September 27 through October 7, 11 days of continuous, intensive effort. Let me give you the numbers, because they're staggering. Over 100 police officers deployed, 48 Australian Defence Force personnel, more than 30 state emergency service volunteers working daily rotations, multiple Aboriginal trackers, police divers, sniffer dogs, both human tracking dogs and cadaver dogs, trail bikes, all-terrain vehicles, mounted police units, helicopters with infrared technology, drones with high-resolution cameras. The search radius initially covered approximately 2 kilometers from the homestead. That's a circle with a roughly 12.5 square kilometer area. Every inch of that area was searched methodically. Searchers walked in line formations, maintaining visual contact with each other, ensuring no ground was missed. They checked every building, every shed, every vehicle on the property. They searched water sources, every dam, every tank, every trough. They used thermal imaging from helicopters, flying at night when Gus's body heat would contrast against the cool ground. They used drones during daylight, capturing aerial footage that could be reviewed frame by frame for any sign of disturbance or movement. The Aboriginal trackers are worth highlighting here. These aren't just skilled outdoorsmen. Aboriginal trackers in Australia are legendary. They can read terrain in ways that seem almost supernatural to those of us not trained in the skill. They can spot a footprint in dust that's days old. They can tell from broken twigs which direction someone traveled and how long ago. They can identify disturbances in vegetation that would be invisible to anyone else. If Gus walked away from that homestead, the trackers should have found his trail. They didn't. By October, first 4 days into the search, investigators had found exactly one piece of potential evidence. A footprint. Just one. The footprint showed a very similar boot pattern to the boots Gus was wearing. It was located near a dam, approximately 500 meters from the homestead. 500 meters. That's about a 5 to 7 minute walk for an adult. For a 4-year-old, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. If this footprint was Gus's, it suggested he'd walked southwest from the homestead toward this dam. Except, there was a problem. Police brought in forensic analysts and trackers to examine the footprint. Their assessment: the print could have been there for a week before the night Gus went missing. The impression wasn't fresh. The edges weren't crisp. Wind and time had degraded it. They couldn't definitively say it was Gus's print. They couldn't even definitively say it was made in the relevant time frame. And more problematically, there were no other footprints leading to or from this location. Just one print. Isolated. If Gus had walked there, where were the other prints? Why could they find only one? The prevailing theory became that wind conditions had erased other tracks. The Australian Outback is notoriously windy. Fine dust and sand can cover or obliterate footprints within hours. But still, it was frustrating. One ambiguous footprint was all they had. By October 3rd, the search had expanded but found nothing else. No clothing, no sun hat, no scraps of fabric caught on vegetation, nothing. Police made the official shift from rescue to recovery. They told media no tangible pieces of evidence, such as footprints, a hat, or clothing, have been located. On October 7th, the first search operation was called off. 11 days, hundreds of personnel, Advanced technology, 12.5 square kilometers thoroughly searched. Result, one ambiguous footprint. Task Force Horizon took over formal management of the investigation. The case was now being treated as a complex missing persons inquiry, with multiple possible scenarios under consideration. Here's where we need to talk about what the absence of evidence really means. Because in investigative terms, absence of evidence is itself evidence, just not the kind anyone wants. If Gus had wandered off and gotten lost in the terrain, searchers should have found something. At minimum, they should have found a clear trail of footprints leading away from the homestead. Even if wind obscured some prints, there should have been protected areas under bushes, in the lee of rocks, in creek beds where prints were preserved. If Gus had fallen into a hazard like a wombat burrow or a mine shaft, searchers should have found disturbed earth, vegetation knocked aside, some indication of where he'd fallen. And we'll come back to the mine shaft issue later, because that becomes a major focus. If Gus had encountered a predator, a wild dog, a snake, there should have been evidence of a struggle, disturbed ground, drag marks, something. And again, birds of prey should have been circling if remains were exposed. If Gus had made it to one of the water sources and drowned, his body should have been in the water. Police divers searched every accessible water source. They found nothing. The absence of any evidence of Gus having walked away from that homestead suggests one of three possibilities. 1. Gus walked in a direction that searchers haven't thoroughly covered yet, or fell into a hazard that hasn't been discovered yet, and evidence does exist but just hasn't been found. 2. Gus didn't walk away at all. Something happened to him at or very near the homestead, and his body was moved or hidden in a way that concealed all evidence. 3. Gus was taken from the property by someone who left no trace. Let's examine each possibility, because police are considering all of them. The official police position has consistently been that they believe Gus wandered off. SA Police Commissioner Grant Stevens stated publicly, "There is nothing to suggest any other circumstances that might have resulted in Gus not being located. Our focus is largely on an exhaustive search of the property, on the basis that Gus has wandered off. But we also have an obligation to consider all possibilities." Notice that phrasing, largely on an exhaustive search, on the basis that Gus has wandered off. But also, an obligation to consider all possibilities. Police aren't ruling anything out, but their primary theory is wandering. Why? Because statistically, it's the most likely scenario. When small children go missing from rural properties, the vast majority of cases involve the child wandering off and getting lost. Sometimes they fall into hazards. Sometimes they succumb to exposure. Sometimes they're found safe. Sometimes they're not. But wandering is the baseline explanation. And Gus was described as adventurous. He was a good walker. He was comfortable outdoors. It's plausible that he saw something interesting, maybe an animal, maybe something shiny, and followed it. Children that age don't have developed risk assessment. They see something that captures their attention, and they go after it without thinking about getting back home. The problem is the complete lack of trail. Even accounting for wind, even accounting for difficult terrain, trackers should have found something. Multiple Aboriginal trackers participated in these searches. These are people who can track animals across rock. They can identify week-old trails in dust. And they found nothing. Associate Professor Nina Sivertson from Flinders University, an expert in survivability and search and rescue operations, was consulted about the case. She noted that a 4-year-old child could potentially travel 3 to 8 kilometers over 3 days and might survive longer than expected if able to access moisture from dew or leaves. Fear impacts a child's ability to find shelter and resources, but children can sometimes surprise you with their resilience. 3 to 8 kilometers over 3 days. That's a huge search area, and it explains why the second search operation expanded so dramatically. On October 14th, a full week after the first search concluded, SA Police announced a renewed search effort. This time, the scale was even larger. 82 Australian Defence Force personnel, 18 police officers. The search radius expanded from 2 kilometers to 5.5 kilometers from the homestead. That's a search area of approximately 95 square kilometers being covered on foot. Let me put that in perspective. 95 square kilometers is about 36.5 square miles. That's roughly the size of Manhattan Island in New York City. Except instead of buildings and streets, you're searching scrubland, creek beds, rocky terrain, and dense vegetation. The conditions were brutal. Temperatures reached 36 degrees Celsius, that's about 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Extreme winds kicked up dust and sand, reducing visibility and making the work even harder. Searchers were covering 20 to 25 kilometers per day on foot. That's 12 to 15.5 miles. In oppressive heat, through rough terrain. The second search ran from October 14th through October 17th. 4 days of intensive effort, and once again, they found nothing. Well, almost nothing. On October 6th, during a brief intermediate search between the first and second major operations, searchers had found another footprint. This one was near a dam about 5.5 kilometers west of the homestead. It showed a boot pattern similar to Gus's boots. 5.5 kilometers. That's a long walk for a 4-year-old. It would take over an hour at a steady pace. But again, there was a problem. Forensic analysis determined this footprint also couldn't be definitively dated. It could have been there before Gus disappeared. And again, no trail of footprints leading to or from this location. Just one isolated print. 2 ambiguous footprints. No other physical evidence. No clothing, no hat, no trace of Gus. On October 17th, the second search operation concluded. The official statement from police: the search had been exhaustive, but no new evidence had been found to assist the investigation. This is where frustration starts to set in, both for investigators and for those of us examining the case. How does a 4-year-old boy vanish so completely? Even if he'd fallen into a hazard, even if he'd wandered so far that he collapsed from exhaustion, even if the worst had happened, searchers should have found something. Unless he didn't wander, unless something else happened. Let's talk about the possibility that something happened to Gus at or very near the homestead, and that evidence was concealed, either deliberately or through panic-driven decisions in the immediate aftermath. I want to be very clear here. Police have stated repeatedly that there is no evidence of foul play. They have not named any suspects. They have not suggested that family members are involved in anything criminal. The family is described as cooperative. So what I'm about to discuss is speculation about a theoretical scenario, not an accusation. That said, investigators always look at the people who were present when a child goes missing. It's standard procedure. Not because those people are automatically suspects, but because they're witnesses. They're the last people who saw the child. They know the timeline. They know the child's behavior and patterns. In this case, the people at the homestead when Gus disappeared were his grandmother Shannon Murray and his younger brother Ronnie, who was about 1 year old. His mother Jessica and grandmother Josie were 10 kilometers away tending sheep. Could something have happened accidentally? Could Gus have fallen, hit his head, and died from an injury, and Shannon panicked? Could there have been a moment of inadequate supervision that led to tragedy, and in panic, evidence was hidden? This scenario has been raised by observers online, and it's worth examining because it does happen in missing persons cases. Not often, but it happens. A caregiver fails to supervise adequately. A child dies accidentally. And in panic and fear of being blamed, the caregiver hides the body and claims the child wandered off. The problem with this theory is the timeline. Shannon discovered Gus missing at approximately 5:30 p.m. Jessica and Josie were called back from the paddock 10 kilometers away. They arrived, and the family searched together for approximately 3 hours before calling police at 8:30 p.m. That's 3 hours. 3 hours is a long time. If Shannon had panicked and hidden evidence, she'd have had to do it quickly before Jessica and Josie arrived. That's maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour at most, depending on how long it took to contact them and how long it took them to drive back. Can you hide a body, a child's body, plus clean up any evidence, plus dispose of or hide clothing and personal items in 30 to 60 minutes on a property you know searchers will thoroughly comb? And do it in a way that professional investigators, cadaver dogs, and Aboriginal trackers can't find? It's possible. But it's difficult. And it would require both presence of mind and physical capability in a moment of extreme stress. The other issue is cadaver dogs. These dogs are trained specifically to detect the scent of human decomposition. They're incredibly accurate. If a body had been at the homestead or buried anywhere nearby, cadaver dogs should have alerted. They didn't. That said, cadaver dogs aren't infallible. If a body is buried deeply enough, or sealed in an airtight container, or submerged in water, dogs can miss it. It's rare, but it happens. So, possibility 2 remains on the table. But it requires a lot of assumptions and a lot of perfect execution in impossible circumstances. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. Now we get to the scenario that terrifies every parent: stranger abduction. The statistics on stranger abduction are actually reassuring in most contexts. Stranger abduction of children is extraordinarily rare. In Australia, approximately 38,000 people are reported missing annually. About 3,008% are children aged 0 to 12. Of those missing children, 98% are found alive if located within 24 hours. True stranger abductions, where a child is taken by someone with no connection to the family, represent a tiny fraction of missing children cases. Most missing children are either runaways, children taken by non-custodial parents, or children who wandered off and got lost. But rare doesn't mean impossible. And some aspects of Gus's disappearance do fit patterns we see in stranger abduction cases. First, the complete absence of evidence. Stranger abductions often leave minimal traces because the abductor is focused on getting the child away from the location as quickly as possible. They don't leave belongings behind. They don't leave footprints because they're carrying the child. Second, the timing. 30 minutes. That's a perfect window. Long enough to grab a child, get them into a vehicle, and drive away. Short enough that there's no organized search yet, no police presence, no heightened awareness. Third, the location. Oak Park Station is remote, but it's not unreachable. Someone with knowledge of the property could have driven there, taken Gus, and left without being seen. The property is massive. There are multiple access points. Cell phone coverage is non-existent, so there would be no digital trail. But here are the problems with this theory. 1. Motive. Why would someone abduct a 4-year-old boy from a remote sheep station? Ransom? There's been no ransom demand. Sexual abuse? It's horrifying to consider, but possible, though statistically. Most child abductions for sexual purposes involve opportunistic grabs in urban or suburban areas where predators have more potential victims to choose from. 2. Opportunity. An abductor would need to know Gus would be outside alone. How would they know that? Unless they'd been watching the property stalking the family, they couldn't have predicted that specific 30-minute window. 3. Access. Getting to Oak Park Station requires driving 45 kilometers on rough tracks from the barrier highway. Your vehicle gets noticed. It kicks up dust. It makes noise. On a remote property, vehicles are heard from kilometers away. How does an abductor drive in, take a child, and drive out without anyone noticing? 4. The dog that didn't bark. This is a reference to a Sherlock Holmes story. Sometimes the absence of something is significant. In this case, no one saw an unfamiliar vehicle. No one heard an unfamiliar engine. No one noticed anything out of place. In the Australian Outback, where everyone notices everything because there's so little happening, the absence of anyone seeing anything suspicious is itself suspicious. That said, there's one scenario that could work. Someone with legitimate access to the property, someone who had a reason to be there, whose vehicle wouldn't be noteworthy, who knew the family's patterns and knew when Gus might be outside alone. But who? Family members are accounted for, workers on the property would be known, neighbors are kilometers away, and police would have interviewed them. This brings us to the most disturbing analysis of the case. From criminologist Xantha Mallett of the University of Newcastle. She's an expert in forensic psychology and missing persons cases. She was interviewed by media about Gus's disappearance, and here's what she said. In that kind of terrain, Gus should have been fairly easy to locate had he simply wandered off. But there's been no sign of him, so you have to think, at this stage, that there's been third-party intervention, sadly. Third-party intervention. That's academic language for someone took him. Mallett continued. In a missing child investigation, there's only 3 options. A child running away, getting lost, or becoming involved in an accident, or there's been third-party intervention. 4-year-olds generally don't run away. Gary Jublin, the former New South Wales homicide detective who led the William Tyrrell investigation for years, also weighed in. William Tyrrell is Australia's other high-profile missing child case. 3-year-old William disappeared from his foster grandmother's property in Kendall, NSW, in 2014. He was wearing a Spider-Man costume. He vanished in minutes. 11 years later, he's never been found. Jublin knows this terrain both literally and figuratively. He knows how these cases work, and here's what he said about Gus. A 3- or 4-year-old child, you can't turn your back on them. So, it's rare they disappear like this. 90% of times the child is found. It's these rare situations where there are no answers. Rare situations where there are no answers. That's where we are with Gus Lamont. No answers, just questions and theories, and the haunting absence of a 4-year-old boy. After the second search concluded on October 17th with no new evidence, investigators faced a decision. Where do you go from here? You've searched 95 square kilometers. You've used every technology available. You've deployed hundreds of personnel, and you found nothing. The answer came from analyzing the property itself more carefully. What hazards might exist that could hide a child's body so completely that even intensive searches would miss it? Two possibilities stood out: water sources and mine shafts. On October 30th and 31st, police conducted a highly specific operation, draining a large dam on Oak Park Station. This wasn't just any dam. This was the main water source on the property, located 600 meters from the homestead. 600 meters, that's only about a 7 to 9 minute walk for an adult. For a 4-year-old, maybe 12 to 15 minutes. The dam was 4.5 meters deep, roughly 15 feet. It held 3.2 million liters of water, that's about 845,000 gallons. Draining that much water is a major undertaking. Police brought in industrial pumps capable of moving 15,000 liters per minute. Even at that rate, it took approximately 3.5 hours to empty the dam. Why drain it? Because water searches are difficult. Even with experienced divers, visibility in farm dams is often zero. The water is murky from sediment, algae, and organic matter. The bottom is soft mud that can obscure objects. You can dive in a dam and be centimeters from a body and never see it. Draining the dam eliminates those problems. Once the water is gone, you can see everything. You can walk the bottom. You can search methodically. Police divers had already searched this dam during the initial operations, but they were searching blind. Draining it would provide certainty. As the water level dropped, the search team examined the bottom. They cleared weed beds that had been submerged. They searched the exposed mud. They checked every inch of the dam's interior. Result: nothing of significance found. That was the official statement. Nothing of significance found. No body, no clothing, no personal items. Nothing to suggest Gus had ever been near that dam, let alone fallen into it. The dam drainage operation ruled out drowning in this particular water source. But Oak Park Station has multiple dams. Are police going to drain all of them? The logistics and cost of draining every water source on a 60,000-hectare property are prohibitive. At some point, you have to make decisions about resource allocation. But more importantly, the dam drainage told investigators something. If Gus isn't in the most obvious water source, the one closest to the homestead, he probably isn't in any of them. Because why would he walk past this dam to get to a further one? That left the other major hazard: mine shafts. On November 25th and 26th, 2 full months after Gus disappeared, police conducted their 4th major search operation. This one focused specifically on abandoned mine shafts. Here's what they were dealing with. Oak Park Station, like much of this region of South Australia, was historically mined for copper. Small-scale operations dotted the landscape in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. When the mines played out or became unprofitable, they were abandoned. Many of those abandoned sites have open shafts, vertical or near-vertical holes in the ground, uncovered, unfenced, sometimes camouflaged by vegetation. These shafts are death traps. If you fall into one, you're either killed immediately by the impact or you're trapped at the bottom, unable to climb out. Over time, the shafts have partially filled with debris, but many remain open and deep. The problem is finding them. On a 60,000-hectare property with scrubby vegetation and rough terrain, mine shafts can be nearly invisible. You could walk within meters of one and not know it's there. During their earlier searches and subsequent property surveys, investigators identified 6 previously unknown mine shafts. These were located between 5.5 and 12 kilometers from the homestead. Some were relatively shallow, you could peer down and see the bottom. Others were up to 20 meters deep, that's about 65 feet. At that depth, you need specialized equipment to search them. Star Group tactical officers were called in. Star Group is South Australia Police's tactical response unit, highly trained in high-risk operations. They have expertise in confined space rescue, rappelling, and technical rope work. If anyone was going to search 20-meter deep mine shafts in the middle of the Outback, it was going to be them. The operation ran over 2 days. For the shallow shafts, officers could visually inspect from the surface using high-powered lights. For the deeper shafts, they used specialized cameras on long cables, lowering them to the bottom and examining every surface via video feed. The searches were thorough, meticulous. Dangerous working around unstable mine shafts is inherently risky, but they had to be sure. On November 26, police released a statement. Following the completion of the search in mine shafts in the Yunta area, police have not located anything to assist with the investigation into the disappearance of Gus Lamont. Nothing. Again, the mine shaft operation concluded 1 day earlier than originally planned, suggesting they'd exhausted the possibilities sooner than expected. And Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams added, "We have not ruled out returning to the property as the investigation continues." Translation: they're not done. If new information emerges, if new potential hazards are identified, they'll come back. But for now, they've searched every obvious place Gus could be. 470 square kilometers searched, hundreds of personnel, millions of dollars spent, months of effort, and they've found virtually nothing. One ambiguous footprint 500 meters from the homestead, another ambiguous footprint 5.5 kilometers away, and nothing else, no body, no clothing, no evidence that Gus Lamont was anywhere other than that mound of dirt where his grandmother last saw him at 5 p.m. on September 27th. Task Force Horizon is the dedicated unit managing this investigation. It's composed of 12 specialists drawn from South Australia Police's Major Crime Investigation Branch. These aren't just regular detectives. This is a specialized team including search coordinators who plan and execute large-scale operations, medical specialists who provide expertise on survivability, exposure, and time-of-death issues, survivability experts who assess how long a child could survive in these conditions and how far they might travel, experienced investigators who've worked other complex missing persons cases. The task force is led by Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams. In statements to media, Williams has been consistent in her messaging. We are determined to explore every avenue in an effort to locate Gus Lamont and provide some closure for his family. We will never give up hope of finding Gus. Never give up hope, that's the official line. But realistically, what hope remains? It's been over 2 months since Gus disappeared. The chances of finding him alive are essentially zero. Medical experts told the family on September 30th, just 3 days after the disappearance, that there was little hope based on survivability assessments. If those experts were right, Gus likely died within the first 72 hours. That's brutal to say. But this is a documentary about facts, not false hope. So, Task Force Horizon is now focused on recovery, not rescue. They're trying to find Gus's remains. They're trying to determine what happened. They're trying to give the family answers and closure. But how do you do that when you've already conducted 4 massive searches and found nothing? The investigation hasn't stopped just because active searches have concluded. Task Force Horizon is pursuing what they call multiple lines of inquiry. Let's break down what that likely means in practical terms. First, reanalysis of evidence. Everything collected during the searches, photographs, video footage, physical samples, is being reviewed again. Sometimes evidence doesn't make sense until you look at it in a new context. Detectives will go through everything with fresh eyes, looking for patterns or clues they might have missed initially. Second, aerial imaging analysis. During the November search operation, police captured extensive aerial imagery of the property within a 10-kilometer radius of the homestead. That's high-resolution imagery covering about 314 square kilometers. Analyzing that much data takes time. Specialists examine the images for disturbed earth, unusual vegetation patterns, anything that might indicate a burial site or hidden location. Third, witness interviews. Police have interviewed family members multiple times. This is standard procedure. You interview people immediately after an incident when details are fresh. Then you interview them again later, when they've had time to process and remember additional details. Sometimes people recall things days or weeks later that seemed insignificant at the time but turn out to be crucial. Fourth, timeline reconstruction. Investigators are building detailed timelines of everyone's movements on September 27th. Where was Jessica? Where was Josie? When exactly did they leave to tend sheep? When did they return? Where was Joshua? When did he learn about the disappearance? Who else was on or near the property that day? Were there any workers, neighbors, delivery drivers, anyone who might have seen something? Fifth, technology forensics. Even though Oak Park Station has no cell coverage, investigators can still examine phone records from the nearest tower points. They can look at when phones last pinged before entering the coverage dead zone. They can track vehicle movements via GPS if cars had tracking devices. They can examine any security cameras in the town of Yunta to see who drove toward Oak Park Station that day. Sixth, background checks. And yes, this means investigating the family. That's not an accusation, it's procedure. Police look at everyone with access to the victim. They check criminal histories. They review child protection records. They look for any red flags in anyone's background. Not because they assume guilt, but because you have to eliminate possibilities systematically. SA Police Commissioner Grant Stevens addressed this directly when he said, "There is nothing to suggest any other circumstances that might have resulted in Gus not being located." Our focus is largely on an exhaustive search of the property on the basis that Gus has wandered off, but we also have an obligation to consider all possibilities. Consider all possibilities. That includes possibilities no one wants to think about. Possibilities that involve people Gus knew and trusted. To date, police have identified no evidence of foul play. No suspects have been named. No charges have been filed. The family continues to cooperate fully. But the investigation isn't closed, and nothing is being ruled out. Let's talk about what happens in missing persons investigations when the active search phase ends. Because this is where many cases go cold, not because investigators stop caring, but because they run out of leads to pursue. In the immediate aftermath of a disappearance, there's urgency. Resources pour in. Media covers every development. The public pays attention. Tips come in. But as days turn to weeks, and weeks turn to months, the urgency fades. Media moves on to other stories. The public forgets. Tips dry up. The investigation enters what's called the long game phase. Detectives maintain case files. They follow up on occasional tips. They check in with the family periodically. But unless new evidence emerges, there's not much active investigation happening day to day. Task Force Horizon is trying to prevent that from happening with Gus's case. By maintaining a dedicated unit, they're signaling that this remains a priority. But resources are finite. At some point, maybe not for months or years, but eventually the task force will be scaled down. Detectives will move on to other cases. Gus Lamont will become another file in the cold case archives, unless something breaks. Before we move on to comparing Gus's case to other Australian missing children cases, we need to talk about a disturbing development that's plagued this investigation: AI-generated fake evidence. In early October, about a week into the search, images began circulating on social media claiming to show Gus Lamont. One image, shared over 24,000 times before being debunked, purported to show a blonde, curly-haired boy being carried by an unidentified man to a car. The image was AI-generated, completely fake. Someone had used artificial intelligence image generation tools to create a fabricated scene, then spread it as if it were real evidence. Why would someone do this? The motivations vary. Some people are just trolls they enjoy causing chaos and distress. Some are conspiracy theorists who want to push a particular narrative. Some are actually trying to help. They think they're solving the case, but they're too unsophisticated to realize they're spreading misinformation. The problem is that fake evidence like this derails investigations. Police have to waste time tracking down the source of the image, verifying it's fake, issuing public statements to debunk it. Investigators have to follow up on tips from people who saw the fake image and think they've spotted Gus. It's a resource drain in an investigation that's already stretched thin. Criminologist Xantha Mallet condemned the practice in strong terms. It is deeply inappropriate and irresponsible to be creating fake AI-generated images in what is a forensic search for a missing child. Social media has been a double-edged sword in this case. On one hand, it spreads awareness. Gus's photo reached millions of people. Tips came in from across Australia. On the other hand, social media is a cesspool of speculation, conspiracy theories, and outright harassment of the family. The family's decision to wait 6 days before releasing Gus's photo, criticized viciously online. Josie Murray's gender identity used to spin wild theories with no evidentiary basis. The family's request for privacy, interpreted as suspicious. This is the dark side of true crime culture. People forget that behind these cases are real families experiencing real trauma. They're not characters in a mystery novel. They're human beings whose 4-year-old son is missing. Gus Lamont's disappearance inevitably draws comparisons to other high-profile Australian missing children cases. Let's examine 3 that share similarities and critical differences with Gus's case. William Tyrrell, 2014. William Tyrrell was 3 years old when he disappeared from his foster grandmother's property in Kendal, New South Wales, on September 12, 2014. He was playing in the yard wearing a Spider-Man costume. His foster mother went inside for a few minutes. When she came back out, William was gone. Sound familiar? The parallels to Gus's case are striking. A young child, approximately the same age, playing outside. A brief period of supervision gap. Complete disappearance. The William Tyrrell investigation became one of the largest and most expensive in New South Wales history. Over 1,100 persons of interest were investigated. More than $15 million was spent on the search and investigation. Over 11 years later, William has never been found. Early in the investigation, Police focused heavily on the possibility of abduction. Kendall is a small town, but it's not as remote as Oak Park Station. There's road access. There are neighbors. The property is in a semi-rural area, where a stranger could plausibly have been passing through. Strike Force Roseanne was established to investigate William's disappearance. For years, investigators pursued the abduction theory. They looked at registered sex offenders in the area. They investigated a person of interest who'd been seen driving near the property. They conducted massive property searches, including excavating areas where cadaver dogs had alerted. Nothing was ever found. No evidence of William. No evidence of abduction. No evidence of anything. In 2021, 7 years after William disappeared, the investigation took a shocking turn. Police began investigating William's foster mother. They searched properties she had access to. They charged her with unrelated offenses. The investigation appeared to be shifting toward the theory that something happened to William at the house and was covered up. As of now, no one has been charged with anything related to William's disappearance. The case remains unsolved, but the shift from abduction theory to family involvement theory shows how investigations evolve when the obvious explanations don't pan out. Could Gus's case follow a similar trajectory? It's possible. If Task Force Horizon can't find evidence of Gus wandering off, if they can't find evidence of third-party involvement, they may start looking more critically at what happened at the homestead in that 30-minute window. But there are key differences between William and Gus. William's property was more accessible. There were neighbors close enough to potentially witness something. The foster family had a more complex situation. Foster care always involves additional scrutiny because the biological and foster family dynamics create complications. Gus's case is more isolated. Fewer witnesses, fewer potential suspects, but also fewer possibilities for solving it. Cleo Smith, 2021. Cleo Smith's case is different but important because it's the rare exception, the happy ending. On October 16, 2021, 4-year-old Cleo Smith was abducted from her family's tent at the Blowholes campsite in Western Australia. Her mother woke up in the middle of the night to find Cleo gone, and the tent zipper opened higher than Cleo could have reached. Immediately, this was treated as an abduction. For 18 days, Australia held its breath. Massive searches, media coverage, an entire nation following every development. On November 3rd, police raided a house in Carnarvon, about 70 kilometers from the campsite. They found Cleo locked in a room, alive and relatively unharmed. She'd been held captive by Terrence Darrell Kelly, a local man with no connection to the family. Kelly was later convicted and sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison. Cleo's case is the exception that proves the rule. Finding an abducted child alive is extraordinarily rare. It requires fast action, good police work, and a significant amount of luck. Cleo was found because Kelly kept her in town, because alert police officers acted on tips, and because they got to her before something worse happened. If Gus was abducted, and that remains a theoretical possibility, the chances of finding him alive after 2 months are essentially zero. Statistically, if a child is going to be killed by an abductor, it happens within the first 3 hours. We're well past that window. But Cleo's case also shows that stranger abductions, while rare, do happen. Kelly had no connection to Cleo's family. He hadn't been stalking them. He was a random predator who saw an opportunity and took it. Could something similar have happened to Gus? It's possible. But the logistics are much harder at a remote sheep station than at a public campsite. The Beaumont children? 1966. This is the case that haunts South Australia. On January 26, 1966 Australia Day, Jane Beaumont, 9 years old, Arna Beaumont, 7 years old, and Grant Beaumont, 4 years old, went to Glenelg Beach in Adelaide. They were supposed to return home by 2 p.m. They never came back. Witnesses reported seeing the children playing at the beach with a tall, blond man in his 30s. The children appeared comfortable with him, suggesting they knew him. After that, nothing. They vanished completely. Nearly 60 years later, the Beaumont children have never been found. Suspects have been investigated, most notably Arthur Stanley Brown and Harry Phipps, but no one has ever been charged. No bodies have ever been recovered. The Beaumont case fundamentally changed Australian culture. Before 1966, it was common for children to roam freely, to play unsupervised, to take public transportation alone. After the Beaumont children, parents became more protective. The idea of stranger danger became embedded in the Australian psyche. Gus's case differs significantly because it didn't happen in a public place. The Beaumont children were at a popular beach with hundreds of people around. Gus was on a private property, kilometers from anyone. but the result is the same. Children who vanished without a trace, leaving families devastated and investigators with no answers. Let's talk numbers, because statistics help us understand what Gus's family is facing. In Australia, approximately 38,000 people are reported missing every year. That sounds like a lot, but it needs context. Most missing persons are adults who voluntarily left their circumstances. They're not victims of foul play, they're people dealing with mental health issues, financial problems, relationship breakdowns. They leave deliberately and often return when they're ready. Of those 38,000 missing persons, approximately 3,008% are children aged 0 to 12. And here's the good news: 98% of missing children are found alive if they're located within 24 hours. 98%. Those are great odds if the child is found quickly. After 48 hours, the recovery rate drops to 72%. After 1 week, 87% of missing children aged 0 to 12 are recovered. But notice, those numbers are for children recovered. That includes children found alive and children found deceased. After a week, the odds of finding a missing child alive drop precipitously. Gus has been missing for over 2 months. At this point, statistically, if he wandered off and got lost, he's deceased. If he was abducted, he's deceased. The only question is where he is. Survivability in the Australian Outback is its own specialized topic. Associate Professor Nina Sivertson from Flinders University, an expert in search and rescue operations, noted that a 4-year-old child could potentially travel 3 to 8 kilometers over 3 days. 3 days. That was the window medical experts gave Gus's family when they said there was little hope on September 30th. What kills people, especially children in the Outback? Dehydration is the primary threat. In hot conditions, the human body loses water rapidly through sweating and respiration. Without replacement fluids, dehydration progresses quickly. Severe dehydration leads to confusion, inability to move, organ failure, and death. An adult in good health might survive 3 to 5 days without water in moderate conditions. A 4-year-old, maybe 24 to 48 hours at most. Could Gus have accessed water? It's possible. If he found dew on leaves in the early morning, if he found a puddle or a stock trough, he might have extended his survival time. Professor Sivertson suggested a child could survive longer than expected if able to find water sources. But surviving and thriving are different things. Even if Gus found water, without food, without shelter from temperature extremes, without adult care, his chances were minimal. Then there's exposure. September in South Australia is early spring. Daytime temperatures can be pleasant, high teens to low 20s, Celsius 60s to 70s Fahrenheit. But nighttime temperatures drop significantly. Without warm clothing, without shelter, a small child can develop hypothermia. Gus was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and pants, more protection than if he'd been in shorts and a t-shirt. But it's not enough for sustained exposure to cold nights. Fear is another factor. When a child gets lost, they often freeze up, literally. They find a spot under a bush, in a hollow, anywhere that feels slightly safe, and they hide. They don't respond to people calling their name because they're scared. They don't know if the voices are friendly or threatening. Search and rescue experts know this. It's why searchers are trained to move slowly, call gently, and search carefully, even in areas that seem too obvious. A child might be huddled 10 meters from a search path, too scared to call out. But after 2 months, if Gus is out there, he's not hiding anymore. He's not capable of hiding anymore. There's no gentle way to say this. Gus Lamont is almost certainly deceased. The question isn't whether he's alive. The question is where his remains are, and what happened to him. That's the brutal calculus investigators are working with. They're not searching for a living child. They're searching for a body. And in 470 square kilometers of harsh Australian outback, a body can be very, very hard to find. Let's return to Xantha Mallet's analysis, because it's the most pointed assessment from an expert who's studied these cases extensively. Mallet is a criminologist at the University of Newcastle. She specializes in forensic psychology and missing persons investigations. She's analyzed dozens of cases, testified in court, and trained law enforcement in investigative techniques. When she speaks about a case like this, people listen. Her assessment of Gus's disappearance was blunt. In that kind of terrain, Gus should have been fairly easy to locate had he simply wandered off. But there's been no sign of him, so you have to think, at this stage, that there's been third-party intervention, sadly. Third-party intervention? Someone took him. Mallet explained her reasoning. In a missing child investigation, there's only three options: a child running away, getting lost, or becoming involved in an accident, or there's been third-party intervention. 4-year-olds generally don't run away. Running away is out. 4-year-olds don't run away from home. They might wander off, but they don't deliberately leave with the intention of not coming back. Getting lost or having an accident, that's the police's primary theory. But Mallet points out the problem. In terrain like Oak Park Station, with the resources that have been deployed, searchers should have found something. They should have found footprints. They should have found disturbed vegetation. They should have found where Gus fell into a hazard or collapsed from exposure. That leaves third-party intervention. Someone took him, alive or deceased, away from the property, or hid him so well that professional searchers can't find him. Gary Jubilin, who spent years investigating William Tyrrell's disappearance, offered a similarly sobering perspective. A 3- or 4-year-old child, you can't turn your back on them, so it's rare they disappear like this. 90% of times the child is found. It's these rare situations where there are no answers. Rare situations. That's what this is. The 10% of cases where everything that should work, the searches, the technology, the expertise doesn't work, where the child simply vanishes and never provides answers. Nicole Morris, director of the Australian Missing Persons Register, provided a counterpoint to Mallet's analysis. She cautioned against jumping to conclusions. Not everybody who goes missing is the victim of foul play. Sometimes, children just wander off, especially on such a large property. Morris specifically mentioned wombat burrows as a potential hazard that could hide a child's body completely. Wombats dig extensive tunnel systems, sometimes several meters deep, with multiple chambers. If Gus crawled into a wombat burrow, either seeking shelter or following an animal out of curiosity, he could have become trapped inside. Collapsed earth could have sealed the entrance. Searchers walking over the burrow wouldn't necessarily know a child was inside. It's grim to consider, but it's a possibility that can't be ruled out. Let's talk about how this case has been covered in media and perceived by the public, because it matters to understanding where the investigation goes from here. In the first week after Gus disappeared, media coverage was sympathetic. News outlets described the family as devastated, the search as extensive, the situation as every parent's nightmare. The focus was on the search efforts and the hope of finding Gus alive. As the first search concluded with no results, the tone began to shift. Questions emerged. Why did the family wait 6 days to release Gus's photo? What was happening at the homestead? Who was supervising Gus? By the time the second search concluded in mid-October, speculation was rampant. Online forums dissected every detail of the family's background. Josie Murray's transgender identity became a focal point for conspiracy theorists. Jessica's introverted personality was interpreted as suspicious. The family's request for privacy was seen as evasive. This is sadly typical in missing persons cases. The public wants answers. When answers don't come quickly, people start creating their own theories. And those theories often focus on the family. Because statistically, family members are involved in a significant percentage of child disappearances. But statistical probability isn't evidence, and public suspicion isn't proof. The media coverage has also highlighted the challenges of investigating a case in a remote location. Reporters driving to Oak Park Station have experienced the same access problems as searchers' flat tires, vehicles getting bogged, difficult terrain. The remoteness that makes this property appealing to the family makes it a nightmare for anyone trying to investigate or cover the story. On October 31st, tensions boiled over. Grandmother Josie Murray confronted reporters who'd entered the Oak Park Station property. She came out with a shotgun, which is legal in Australia for rural property owners who use firearms for pest control, and shouted at the journalists to leave. The incident was captured on camera and went viral. Some people saw it as evidence of guilty behavior. Why would an innocent person react so aggressively? Others saw it as a grandmother at the end of her rope, grieving the loss of her grandson while being harassed by media. Context matters. The family had repeatedly asked media to stay off their property. They'd released one statement through a family friend and then gone silent. They were trying to grieve privately. And reporters kept showing up uninvited. Put yourself in Josie's position. Your grandson is missing. You're being accused online of involvement. Conspiracy theorists are attacking you. Police have searched your property 4 times. And now, journalists are driving onto your land without permission. How would you react? The shotgun incident became a turning point. After that, media coverage became more cautious. Reporters stopped trying to access the property. Coverage focused more on the official search operations and less on family speculation. But the damage was done. Public perception of the family had shifted from sympathetic to suspicious, and that perception is hard to reverse. As of December 8, 2025, no new developments have been publicly announced since the November 26 conclusion of the mineshaft search. That doesn't mean the investigation has stopped, just that there's nothing new to report. Task Force Horizon remains active. The 12-member specialist unit continues to manage the investigation under Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams. They're still pursuing what police describe as multiple lines of inquiry, though the specifics of those inquiries aren't being disclosed. Police have not named any suspects. No persons of interest have been publicly identified. No one has been charged with any offense related to Gus's disappearance. The official position remains: no evidence of foul play has been found. But no evidence of foul play doesn't mean foul play didn't occur. It means evidence hasn't been found, which, in a case where virtually nothing has been found, isn't particularly reassuring. The family continues to cooperate with investigators. A victim contact officer maintains regular communication with them, providing support and updates when possible. The family has made no additional public statements since September 30th. Joshua Lamont, Gus's father, has not spoken publicly about his son's disappearance. No interviews, no social media posts, no statements through representatives. Jessica Lamont, Shannon Murray, and Josie Murray have similarly remained silent beyond that initial statement through Bill Harbison. This silence is understandable. The family is traumatized. They're grieving a child who's missing with no body, no answers, no closure. They're being vilified online by conspiracy theorists and armchair detectives. They want privacy. They deserve privacy. But the silence also leaves a vacuum that speculation rushes to fill. One notable aspect of this case: no reward has been publicly announced for information leading to Gus's location or the resolution of his disappearance. This is unusual in high-profile missing persons cases. Typically, when a child disappears and searches don't immediately locate them, rewards are offered. Sometimes families offer rewards. Sometimes governments offer rewards. Sometimes media outlets or charitable organizations offer rewards. Rewards serve two purposes. First, they incentivize people with information to come forward. Someone who might be hesitant to get involved might be motivated by a financial reward. Second, they signal to the public that the case is still active, still important, still worthy of attention. The William Tyrrell case had a $1 million reward. The Daniel Morecambe case, another high-profile Australian child disappearance from 2003, had rewards totaling $1 million. These are not small amounts. Why has no reward been offered in Gus's case? We don't know. It's possible police don't believe a reward would generate useful information if they truly believe Gus wandered off and perished in the outback. A reward won't change that. It's possible the family hasn't had the resources or the presence of mind to organize a reward. It's possible rewards are being considered but haven't been announced yet. Or it's possible that behind the scenes, police have reasons for not offering a reward. Sometimes in investigations where family involvement is suspected, police advise against rewards because it could complicate potential prosecutions down the line. But that's speculation. The fact remains: no reward has been offered. And that's noteworthy. Where does Task Force Horizon go from here? They've conducted 4 major search operations covering 470 square kilometers. They've drained a dam. They've searched mine shafts. They've deployed every resource available to them. And they've found essentially nothing. At this point, the investigation shifts into a different mode. Instead of active searching, it becomes more about intelligence gathering and analysis. Investigators will continue interviewing family members and associates. They'll look for inconsistencies in statements. They'll look for changes in behavior or demeanor. They'll look for any indication that someone knows more than they're saying. They'll continue analyzing the aerial imagery captured during the November search. That's tedious, time-consuming work examining 314 square kilometers of high-resolution imagery, looking for anything unusual. Disturbed earth, vegetation patterns that don't match surrounding areas, anomalies that might indicate human activity. They'll follow up on tips from the public. Even though media attention has faded, tips still trickle in. Most are unhelpful people report seeing children who vaguely resemble Gus, or they have theories they want to share, or they're conspiracy theorists with wild accusations. But occasionally, a tip provides a genuine lead, and every tip has to be assessed. They'll coordinate with other agencies: the Australian Federal Police, interstate police forces, international agencies. If there's any possibility Gus was taken out of South Australia, These jurisdictional collaborations are standard in major cases, and they'll wait. Sometimes investigations break because someone's conscience gets to them. Someone who knows something decides to talk. A family member gets tired of carrying a secret, a relationship breaks down, and one party turns on the other. These breakthroughs can happen years after the initial incident. The William Tyrrell investigation took 7 years before focus shifted to his foster mother. The Daniel Morcombe case took 8 years before Brett Peter Cowan was arrested and charged. These things take time. But waiting is agonizing for families, and it's expensive for taxpayers. Task Force Horizon is costing money every day it operates. At some point, if no new leads develop, the task force will be scaled down. It won't be disbanded. Cold case units can keep cases open indefinitely, but active investigation will wind down. That point hasn't been reached yet. As of December 2025, Task Force Horizon is still fully operational, but the clock is ticking. Let's talk about what the Lamont and Murray families are going through, because it's important to remember there are real people behind these facts and statistics. Gus's mother, Jessica, has lost her son. She lives on the property where he disappeared. Every day, she wakes up in that homestead, knowing that somewhere on this vast property, or somewhere else entirely, her 4-year-old son is lying dead. She doesn't have a body to bury. She doesn't have answers about what happened. She's trapped in a nightmare with no resolution. Gus's father, Joshua, has lost his son and is living 100 kilometers away from where it happened. According to reports, he had concerns about safety at Oak Park Station. If those concerns were real, he's now living with the "I told you so" that he'd give anything not to be able to say. Shannon and Josie Murray have lost their grandson. They were the ones supervising him when he disappeared. Whether or not that supervision was adequate, they're living with the guilt of his loss. They're also living with public speculation, online harassment, and the constant presence of investigators combing their property. Gus's younger brother, Ronnie, will grow up knowing he had a brother who disappeared when Ronnie was just a baby. He'll be raised with that loss, that absence, that mystery hanging over his childhood. And the extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, are all dealing with the ripple effects of this tragedy. Family friend Fleur Tiver spoke to media about the toll on the family. It's heartbreaking what's being said about them. There is no way they've harmed this child. They're devastated. They want answers as much as anyone. The family established a support network through their community in Yunta and the broader region. South Australians have been supportive in many ways, leaving lights on overnight as a symbolic gesture of hope, donating to search efforts, providing meals and support to searchers. But support from strangers doesn't fill the hole left by a missing child. There's a particular cruelty to cases like this. Missing without a body. When someone dies and you have remains, you can hold a funeral. You can have closure, not complete closure, because losing a child is never something you get over, but a marker, a ritual, an acknowledgement that this phase of your life is over. With a missing child, you're in limbo. You can't declare them dead, even though rationally you know they must be. You can't move on, even though staying stuck is destroying you. You're trapped. Some families of long-term missing persons hold memorial services anyway, even without a body. They need the ritual. They need to mark the loss publicly. We don't know if the Lamont family will do that. It's only been 2 months. But at some point, they'll have to decide how to move forward with their lives when Gus's fate remains unknown. Gus's disappearance raises broader questions about child safety in remote areas of Australia. Is it safe to raise children on isolated properties like Oak Park Station? What level of supervision is reasonable? What are the hazards? And how can they be mitigated? Let's be clear, millions of children grow up in rural and remote Australia without incident. Farm life, station life, outback life, these are legitimate ways to raise families. Children benefit from space, from nature, from learning to navigate the land. The risk of stranger abduction is lower in remote areas than in urban ones. Most child abductions occur in populated areas where predators have access to many potential victims. But remote areas have their own risks, hazards that don't exist in suburbs. Unfenced water sources, abandoned mine shafts, venomous snakes, wild animals, extreme weather, and the sheer distances involved if something goes wrong. When a child gets hurt on a suburban playground, parents can call an ambulance and have medical attention within minutes. When a child gets hurt on a remote property, parents might be 30 minutes or more from help, even by helicopter. Supervision in remote areas has to account for these factors. A 4-year-old child playing alone outside in a suburban backyard with fences and nearby neighbors is relatively safe. The same child, playing alone outside on a 60,000-hectare property with multiple hazards, is at much higher risk. But supervision is complicated. Parents and caregivers can't watch children every single second. It's not realistic. It's not healthy. Children need some independence, some freedom to explore and learn. Finding the right balance is difficult. In Gus's case, 30 minutes of unsupervised outdoor play while grandmother Shannon was inside caring for another child isn't inherently negligent. Many families would consider that reasonable. A 4-year-old playing near the house while an adult is inside and checks on them periodically, that's normal parenting in many contexts. But context matters. Oak Park Station isn't a suburban backyard. The risks are different. The potential consequences of a child wandering off are much more severe. After Gus's disappearance, child safety experts weighed in on what parents in remote areas should consider. First, know your property's hazards. Every water source should be identified and, if possible, fenced or covered. Mine shafts should be located and filled or securely capped. Wombat burrows near living areas should be monitored. Snake habitats should be identified so children can be taught to avoid them. Second, age-appropriate supervision. A 4-year-old needs more supervision than a 10-year-old. In remote areas, that means direct line of sight, supervision, an adult watching the child. Not just proximity, supervision where an adult is nearby, but not actively watching. Third, communication systems. Properties without cell phone coverage should have alternative communication methods. Radios, satellite phones, emergency beacons. If something goes wrong, you need to be able to call for help immediately. Fourth, search protocols. Families in remote areas should have a plan for what to do if a child goes missing. Who searches where? How do you mark areas already searched? When do you call for outside help? Having a plan reduces response time and increases the chances of a successful outcome. None of this is a criticism of the Murray family. They're not negligent parents or grandparents. They're people who experienced an unthinkable tragedy. But their tragedy can serve as a learning moment for other families living in similar circumstances. Let's address something uncomfortable. The ethics of true crime coverage, including this documentary. Gus Lamont's case has been covered extensively by media. News outlets, true crime podcasts, YouTube channels, online forums. Everyone has an opinion and a theory. Some coverage has been respectful and fact-based. Some has been exploitative and speculative. There's a podcast called The Trial, Australia, that released an episode on November 20th titled New Details in the Mystery of Gus Lamont. The episode featured journalist Carly Smith and private investigator Ken Gamble discussing the case. By all accounts, it was a responsible discussion of publicly available information without wild speculation. But for every responsible coverage, there are 10 irresponsible ones. YouTube channels with clickbait titles, Facebook groups trading conspiracy theories, TikTok videos claiming to have solved the case with no evidence whatsoever. And yes, we need to acknowledge that this documentary, the one you're listening to right now, is also a form of media coverage. We're examining Gus's case in detail, presenting theories, analyzing evidence. Where's the line between informative coverage and exploitation? Here's where I believe that line is. Respect for the victim and the family. Grounding in facts, not speculation. Transparency about what we know versus what we're theorizing, and awareness that this isn't entertainment, it's a real child who's really missing, and a real family that's really suffering. I've tried to stay on the right side of that line in this documentary. I've presented facts as facts, theories as theories, and speculation as speculation. I've avoided sensationalism. I've criticized irresponsible coverage while acknowledging that covering the case at all places me in a complicated position. Why cover it then? Because public attention matters in missing persons cases. The more people who know about Gus, the more people who might have relevant information, the more pressure to keep the investigation active, the more resources allocated to finding answers. But public attention is also a burden on the family. It invades their privacy. It subjects them to judgment and criticism. It turns their tragedy into public property. There's no perfect answer to this ethical dilemma. The best we can do is try to be responsible, try to be respectful, and try to remember that behind every true crime story is a human being who deserves dignity. What can we learn from other Australian missing children cases that might inform where Gus's investigation goes from here? The William Tyrrell case teaches us that investigations can take years and still not reach resolution. William disappeared in 2014. We're now in 2025, 11 years later, and there's still no definitive answer about what happened to him. The investigation shifted focus multiple times. Tens of millions of dollars were spent. Hundreds of investigators worked the case. And we still don't know where William is. If Gus's case follows a similar trajectory, we could be looking at years of investigation with no resolution. The Daniel Morcombe case teaches us that patience and persistence can eventually pay off. Daniel was abducted from a bus stop in Queensland in 2003. For 8 years, investigators pursued hundreds of leads. In 2011, Brett Peter Cowan was arrested and charged. He led police to Daniel's remains. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The breakthrough came from a covert operation. Undercover officers befriended Cowan and gradually got him to confess. It took 8 years, but they got him. So there's hope that even if Gus's case goes cold, it could eventually be solved. The Beaumont children case teaches us the opposite lesson. Some cases are never solved. It's been almost 60 years since Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont disappeared from Glenelg Beach. Despite extensive investigations, multiple suspects, and numerous searches, they've never been found. No one has ever been charged. The case remains open, but practically speaking, it's unlikely to ever be solved. The primary suspects are dead. Evidence has been lost to time. Witnesses' memories have faded, or witnesses themselves have died. At some point, unsolved cases become historical curiosities rather than active investigations. The Beaumont case crossed that threshold decades ago. Will Gus's case eventually reach that point? Possibly, but we're not there yet. The Cleo Smith case teaches us that rapid action and good police work can save lives. Cleo was found alive after 18 days because investigators moved quickly, pursued the right leads, and didn't give up. If Gus was abducted and is being held somewhere, the window for finding him alive has probably closed. But Cleo's case reminds us that miracles can happen. The overarching lesson from all these cases: missing children investigations are complex, resource-intensive, and often frustrating. There's no formula for solving them. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And sometimes the answer is heartbreaking even when you find it. Before we move into the final section of this documentary, let's take a moment to clearly separate what we know from what we're speculating about. Facts. Gus Lamont was last seen at approximately 5 p.m. on September 27, 2025, playing outside the homestead at Oak Park Station. His grandmother, Shannon Murray, saw him. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Shannon went outside to call him for dinner. He was gone. The family searched for approximately 3 hours before contacting police at 8:30 p.m. 4 major search operations have been conducted, covering 470 square kilometers. Hundreds of personnel, including military, police, volunteers, Aboriginal trackers, and specialists, have participated. One ambiguous footprint was found 500 meters from the homestead. Another ambiguous footprint was found 5.5 kilometers away. No other physical evidence has been located. Police have stated there is no evidence of foul play. No suspects have been named. No charges have been filed. The family has cooperated fully with the investigation. Task Force Horizon continues to manage the case. Theories about what happened to Gus range from wandering and getting lost in difficult terrain to falling into an undiscovered hazard like a mine shaft or wombat burrow, to third-party involvement, either by family members or a stranger. Some experts believe the lack of evidence suggests third-party involvement. Other experts believe the terrain and hazards could account for the lack of evidence even in a wandering scenario. These are opinions, not facts. Speculation about family dynamics, about tensions between Joshua and the Murray family, about the significance of the 6-day delay in releasing Gus's photo. These are interpretations of limited information, not established facts. Online theories about Josie Murray's involvement based on her transgender identity are baseless speculation with no evidentiary foundation. They should be dismissed as the conspiracy theories they are. It's important to distinguish between facts and speculation because mixing them leads to misinformation, and misinformation harms investigations and devastates families. Welcome to the final part of our investigation into the disappearance of Gus Lamont. We've covered a lot of ground, literally and figuratively. Now it's time to bring everything together and talk about what this case means and where it might go from here. Let's recap the key points of this case. On September 27, 2025, 4-year-old Augustus Gus Lamont was playing outside his grandparents' homestead at Oak Park Station in South Australia. At approximately 5:30 p.m., he disappeared. Within hours, police responded. Within days, one of South Australia's largest search operations was underway. 4 major search operations covered 470 square kilometers of harsh outback terrain. Hundreds of personnel participated. Advanced technology, including infrared helicopters, drones, cadaver dogs, and Aboriginal trackers, were deployed. A 3.2 million-liter dam was drained. 6 abandoned mine shafts were searched. Result: virtually no trace of Gus has been found. 2 ambiguous footprints. No clothing, no belongings, no body. Nothing. Police maintain there is no evidence of foul play, but they're considering all possibilities. Task Force Horizon continues investigating. The family remains cooperative but silent. No suspects have been named. No charges have been filed. As of December 8, 2025, 2 months and 11 days after Gus disappeared, he remains missing. And the likelihood of ever finding definitive answers decreases with each passing day. Throughout this documentary, we've discussed 3 possible scenarios for what happened to Gus. Let's evaluate each one final time based on everything we've learned. Scenario 1. Gus wandered off and perished in the terrain. This is the police's working theory. It's statistically the most likely explanation when a young child disappears from a rural property. Evidence supporting this scenario. Gus was described as adventurous. He was a capable walker. The property has multiple hazards where a child could fall or become trapped. The terrain is vast and difficult to search comprehensively. Evidence against this scenario: the complete lack of a trail. Aboriginal trackers should have found some indication of direction of travel. The absence of any physical evidence, no clothing, no disturbance, is harder to explain if Gus wandered for any significant distance. Assessment: possible. But the lack of evidence is troubling. If this is what happened, either Gus fell into a hazard so quickly that he left no trail, or the hazard is in a location that hasn't been searched yet, or evidence was destroyed by weather before searchers arrived. Scenario 2. Something happened at or near the homestead, and evidence was concealed. This scenario suggests an accident or incident occurred close to the house, and someone panicked and hid evidence. Evidence supporting this scenario: the 30-minute window between when Gus was last seen and when he was discovered missing. The 3-hour delay before police were called. The complete absence of evidence suggesting Gus walked away. The lack of any trail. Evidence against this scenario: cadaver dogs didn't alert to anything. The family has been consistently cooperative with police. There's no evidence of any incident at the homestead. Hiding a body and all evidence in a short time frame on a property that would be thoroughly searched would be extremely difficult. Assessment: possible, but requires assuming deliberate concealment by someone at the homestead. Police have found no evidence to support this. Without evidence, it remains speculation. Scenario 3. Third-party involvement abduction. This scenario suggests someone took Gus from the property, either alive or deceased. Evidence supporting this scenario: expert opinion from criminologist Xanthi Mallet that the lack of evidence suggests third-party intervention. The complete absence of any trail or physical evidence. The 30-minute window that would allow someone to take Gus and leave. Evidence against this scenario: the remoteness of the property makes access difficult and noticeable. No one reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles. There's no motive for a stranger abduction, no ransom demand, no suspects with histories suggesting this type of crime. The property location doesn't fit typical stranger abduction patterns. Assessment: possible but difficult to reconcile with the logistics of the location. Unless the abductor was someone with legitimate access to the property, someone who wouldn't be noticed, the mechanics of getting in, taking Gus, and getting out undetected are challenging. So where does that leave us? 3 scenarios, all possible, none proven. This is the frustrating reality of cases like Gus's. Sometimes, there just aren't clear answers. The truth is probably simpler than any conspiracy theory, and more tragic than we want to imagine. A 4-year-old boy wandered away from his grandmother's supervision, encountered a hazard, and died. His body is somewhere on that vast property, or near it, hidden by terrain or natural processes. Searchers did their best but couldn't find him. That's the most likely explanation. But most likely isn't the same as certain. And until Gus is found, we won't know for sure. The Lamont and Murray families are living in a nightmare that has no endpoint. Gus is missing. There's no body to bury. There's no closure. There's no moving on. In missing persons cases, families often describe the experience as ambiguous loss, a type of grief where the loss isn't definite. You can't mourn because you don't have confirmation. You can't hope, because realistically there's no hope. you're stuck. Some families of long-term missing persons describe spending years in a state of suspended animation. They can't pack away the missing person's belongings because that feels like giving up. They can't stop waiting for the phone to ring with news. They can't make plans for the future because the present is unresolved. Eventually, sometimes years later, many families reach a point where they accept they'll never have answers. They hold memorial services without bodies. They create spaces to remember their loved ones, even without certainty about what happened. They find ways to move forward while carrying the loss. Gus's family isn't there yet. It's only been 2 months. They're still in the acute phase of grief and trauma. But eventually, they'll face decisions about how to live with this uncertainty. Gus's disappearance hasn't just affected his family, it's affected the entire region. Yunta is a tiny township of 85 residents. Everyone knows everyone. When a child goes missing from a nearby property, it's personal for the whole community. Residents have supported the family, supported searchers, and dealt with the influx of media and police into their quiet town. The broader South Australian community has also been impacted. Gus's case received extensive media coverage. Parents across the state looked at their own children and imagined the horror of this happening to them. Conversations happened about child safety, about supervision, about the risks of rural living. South Australia carries the weight of being the state where the Beaumont children disappeared in 1966. That case haunts the collective consciousness. Now, there's another missing child case, another family devastated, another mystery unsolved. It reinforces a sense of vulnerability, a reminder that terrible things can happen even in places that feel safe. If you're watching this documentary from Australia, particularly South Australia, and you have any information about Gus Lamont's disappearance, please contact South Australia Police. Even if you think your information is insignificant, let police decide that. Maybe you were traveling near Oak Park Station on September 27th. Maybe you saw a vehicle you didn't recognize. Maybe you heard something about the case from someone that didn't sit right with you. Maybe you noticed something in the days before or after Gus disappeared. Crime Stoppers Australia can take anonymous tips. You don't have to identify yourself. You don't have to get involved beyond providing information. But that information could be the piece that breaks this case open. For those of you who aren't in Australia, you can still help by sharing this case. The more people who know about Gus, the more eyes looking at unsolved mysteries, the better chance that someone somewhere knows something relevant. And for everyone, please be respectful. Don't harass the family. Don't spread conspiracy theories. Don't share fake AI-generated images. Don't contribute to the misinformation that plagues cases like this. If you want to honor Gus's memory, do it by respecting the investigation, respecting the family's privacy, and respecting the facts. We talked earlier about the William Tyrrell case as a comparison, but I want to return to it briefly because the parallels are striking and potentially predictive. William Tyrrell disappeared in 2014. For years, the investigation focused on abduction by a stranger. A person of interest was identified, a man who'd been seen driving in the area, and investigated extensively. Nothing was ever proven. In 2021, 7 years after William disappeared, the investigation shifted. Police began examining William's foster mother. They searched properties she had access to. They brought in cadaver dogs. They dug up areas where dogs alerted. They charged her with unrelated offenses. As of now, no one has been charged with William's disappearance or death. But the investigation clearly moved from stranger abduction to something happened at the house. Could Gus's case follow the same trajectory? It's possible. If Task Force Horizon exhausts external possibilities, if they can't find evidence of Gus wandering off, can't find evidence of third-party involvement, they'll look more critically at what happened at the homestead in that 30-minute window. That doesn't mean anyone at the homestead did anything wrong. It means investigators will examine every possibility, no matter how uncomfortable. The William Tyrrell investigation took 7 years to reach that inflection point, where focus shifted from external suspects to the home environment. That's a long time. 7 years of investigating strangers, sex offenders, persons of interest. 7 years of searching bushland and properties. 7 years of the family maintaining they had no idea what happened. And then suddenly, investigators were digging up a yard the foster mother had access to. Now, it's crucial to note, just because police investigated the foster mother doesn't mean she was responsible for William's disappearance. As of December 2025, she hasn't been charged with anything related to William. The investigation of her could be based on eliminating her as a possibility, not proving she's guilty. But the shift is significant because it shows how investigations evolve when obvious answers don't materialize. Gus's case could go the same direction. Not because the family is guilty of anything, but because when every other possibility is exhausted, investigators have to look at the people who were there when it happened. Shannon Murray was supervising Gus. Jessica Lamont and Josie Murray were 10 kilometers away, but returned quickly. These are the people who know what the environment was like that day, what Gus's behavior was like, what the timeline actually was. If police find inconsistencies in statements, if new information emerges that contradicts what they were initially told, the investigation will pivot. That pivot hasn't happened yet. As of now, police describe the family as fully cooperative and state there's no evidence of foul play. But we're only 2 months into this investigation. William Tyrrell's investigation took 7 years to shift. Give it time. We've talked a lot about the family's trauma, but let's briefly acknowledge the toll on investigators as well. The police officers, ADF personnel, SES volunteers, Aboriginal trackers, everyone who participated in those 4 search operations, they're human beings too. They went out into harsh terrain day after day, hoping to find Gus, hoping to bring him home to his family, hoping to give everyone closure. And they found nothing. That's psychologically brutal. Search and rescue professionals describe finding a deceased child as heartbreaking but necessary. At least the family gets answers. Not finding anything at all feels like failure, even though rationally they know they did everything possible. Some searchers will carry Gus's case with them for the rest of their careers. They'll wonder if they walked past him somehow. They'll wonder if there was something they missed. They'll see his photo years from now and feel that pang of unfinished business. Task Force Horizon investigators are probably feeling the same frustration. They've deployed every resource, pursued every lead, examined every possibility they can think of, and they're no closer to answers than they were on September 27th. This isn't a criticism of their work. By all accounts, the investigation has been thorough and professional. But sometimes in investigations, you do everything right and still don't get the result you need. That's hard to accept. As this case ages, and barring a breakthrough, it will age, media coverage will decrease. That's inevitable. News organizations have finite resources. They can't cover the same story indefinitely without new developments. Right now, in December 2025, Gus's case occasionally appears in Australian news outlets when there are updates or milestones. The 2-month mark, the 3-month mark, eventually the 6-month mark, the 1-year mark. But between those milestones, coverage will fade. The public will forget. New cases will capture attention. Gus Lamont will become another name in the long list of Australian missing children. This is where families often struggle. The intense public attention in the early days, while overwhelming, at least keeps the case alive. People are talking about it. People are looking. When that attention fades, families feel abandoned. Their child is still missing, but no one seems to care anymore. Some families become advocates. They keep their child's case in the public eye through social media, through anniversary appeals, through partnerships with missing persons organizations. The parents of Daniel Morecambe did this for 8 years before his case was solved. The foster family of William Tyrrell has done this for over 11 years. We don't know yet whether Gus's family will take that approach. They've been private so far. They may choose to continue grieving privately rather than making public appeals. That's their right. But public engagement does keep cases active in the public consciousness, which can generate tips and keep pressure on investigators. True crime content creators, podcasters, YouTubers, documentary makers like me will periodically revisit Gus's case. Some will do so respectfully, focusing on facts and honoring Gus's memory. Others will sensationalize it, speculate wildly, and exploit the family's tragedy for views. The family can't control how media covers this story. None of us can. But those of us who do cover it have an obligation to do it responsibly. Let's talk about the realistic possibilities for how this case might eventually resolve. Because cases do get resolved, even years later, sometimes in ways that are completely unexpected. Possibility 1. Gus's remains are found during future searches. This is the most straightforward resolution. Task Force Horizon has stated they haven't ruled out returning to Oak Park Station for additional searches. Maybe they identify a new area to focus on. Maybe new technology becomes available that helps locate remains. Maybe ground-penetrating radar detects something in an area that was previously searched but not excavated. If Gus's remains are found, cause of death might be determinable. If he fell into a mine shaft, the location and injuries would tell that story. If he died from exposure, the location and condition of remains might indicate that. If something else happened, forensic analysis could reveal it. Finding remains would give the family closure. Not happy closure, there's no happy ending to a 4-year-old dying, but at least certainty. They could hold a funeral. They could grieve properly. They could begin the long process of healing. Possibility 2. Someone comes forward with information. This happens more often than you might think. Years after an incident, someone's conscience gets to them, or a relationship breaks down and one party decides to tell what they know. Or someone who was protecting someone else realizes they can't carry the burden anymore. In the Daniel Morecambe case, the breakthrough came when an undercover police officer befriended the suspect and gradually got him to confess. It took 8 years, but it worked. In Gus's case, if someone knows something, whether it's a family member, a worker on the property, a neighbor, anyone, there's always the possibility they'll eventually talk. Guilt is a powerful motivator, and so is immunity or a reduced sentence if they negotiate cooperation. Possibility 3. The case goes cold and remains unsolved. This is the outcome no one wants, but we have to acknowledge as realistic. Some cases are never solved. The Beaumont children. Eton Patz in New York, missing for decades before a suspect was finally convicted. These cases can stay unsolved for lifetimes. If Gus's case goes cold, it will sit in the cold case files. Periodically, cold case detectives will review it looking for something previous investigators missed. New detectives will bring fresh eyes. New technology will be applied to old evidence. But without new information or new evidence, cold cases stay cold, and families live forever without answers. Possibility 4. A random discovery years from now. Sometimes remains are found by accident. A farmer clearing land discovers bones. A property developer excavating for construction finds a child's remains. A bushwalker stumbles across something in a remote area. This happened with Daniel Morecambe. After Brett Peter Cowan confessed, he led police to where he'd buried Daniel's remains under a bridge, in an area that had been searched multiple times but where the body wasn't visible without excavation. It could happen with Gus. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, someone could be working on Oak Park Station or nearby land and find small bones. DNA testing would provide identification, and suddenly a case that's been dormant for years would have resolution. But that's years away, if it happens at all. For now, the family waits. What can we take away from Gus Lamont's disappearance? What lessons should we learn? First, child supervision in remote areas requires vigilance. This isn't about blame. The Murray family didn't do anything criminally negligent, but the reality is that remote properties have hazards that suburban homes don't. A moment of inattention that would be harmless in a fenced backyard can be fatal on a 60,000-hectare sheep station. Parents and caregivers in rural and remote areas need to assess risks differently than urban parents do. They need to know what hazards exist on their properties. They need to establish safety perimeters. They need backup communication systems in case of emergencies. Second, search and rescue operations, no matter how extensive, aren't infallible. 470 square kilometers sounds enormous, and it is, but Oak Park Station covers 60,000 hectares, about 231 square miles. 470 square kilometers is about 181 square miles. That means large areas of the property still haven't been thoroughly searched. Terrain matters. Vegetation matters. Weather conditions matter. You can walk within meters of something and miss it entirely. This isn't a criticism of searchers, it's a reality of searching vast, difficult terrain. Third, missing persons investigations are complex, resource-intensive, and often frustrating. Police can do everything right and still not solve the case. Technology can fail. Evidence can be destroyed by weather. Witnesses can be unreliable. Leads can go nowhere. The public often thinks investigations should work like they do on television. Evidence is found, analyzed, and leads directly to a suspect within an hour. Real investigations take months or years. They involve dead ends, false leads, and painstaking work that yields no results. Fourth, online speculation and harassment harm investigations and families. The conspiracy theories about Josie Murray, the fake AI images, the social media pylons, none of this helped find Gus. All of it made the family's suffering worse. True crime has become entertainment. People watch documentaries like this one, listen to podcasts, follow cases obsessively. That's fine when it stays within appropriate bounds. But when it crosses into harassment of families, spreading misinformation, or interfering with investigations, it's harmful. If you're interested in true crime, consume it responsibly. Support families. Respect investigators. Don't spread theories without evidence. Fifth, some questions may never be answered. That's the hardest lesson of all. We want closure. We want answers. We want to understand what happened. But sometimes we don't get those things. Sometimes a child disappears and we never know why or how or where they are. Learning to live with uncertainty, with ambiguous loss, with questions that have no answers, that's a skill no one wants to develop. But for the families of missing persons, it's a necessity. We've spent hours examining evidence, discussing theories, analyzing search operations. But let's take a moment to remember who this is actually about. Gus Lamont was 4 years old. He had blonde, curly hair. He loved minions, hence the shirt he was wearing when he disappeared. He was shy but adventurous, which sounds contradictory but makes perfect sense for a 4-year-old. Cautious around strangers, bold when exploring familiar territory. He had a little brother, Ronnie, who was only about a year old when Gus disappeared. Ronnie will never have memories of playing with Gus. He'll only know him through photos and stories. Gus had parents who loved him, grandparents who cared for him, extended family who are devastated by his loss. He wasn't a mystery to be solved or a puzzle to be figured out. He was a child, a real little boy with a personality and preferences and a life that was just beginning, and now he's gone. Somewhere on that vast property, or somewhere else entirely, Gus Lamont lies. His body is slowly being reclaimed by the land, by weather, by insects, by natural processes. At some point, there will be nothing left but bones, if even that. The Australian sun and wind and rain are harsh on organic material. By the time Gus is found, if he's ever found, he may be unrecognizable. Only DNA testing will confirm his identity. Only forensic analysis will suggest how he died. But before all that, he was just a 4-year-old boy playing in the dirt on a September evening. And then he wasn't. That's what we should remember. The disappearance of Gus Lamont is a tragedy without resolution. 2 months after he vanished from Oak Park Station, we're no closer to understanding what happened to him than we were on September 27th. Police have done everything they can with the resources available. Task Force Horizon continues investigating. The family continues cooperating. But without new evidence, without new leads, the investigation will eventually wind down. Gus will join the long list of Australian missing children. Some of those names you know. The Beaumont children, William Tyrrell, Daniel Morecambe. Others are less famous but no less important: Cheryl Grimmer, Eloise Worledge, Keisha Abrahams. Each one represents a family destroyed, a community traumatized, an unsolved mystery. Maybe Gus's case will be solved. Maybe in 6 months or 6 years, there will be a breakthrough. Someone will come forward. Evidence will be found. Technology will reveal something previously hidden. Or maybe Gus's case will remain unsolved forever. His family will live the rest of their lives not knowing what happened to him. Investigators will retire having never found him. And someday, decades from now, the only people who remember Gus Lamont will be true crime enthusiasts examining old cases. I hope that's not what happens. I hope this case gets resolved. I hope the family gets answers. I hope Gus is found so he can be laid to rest properly. But hope doesn't solve cases. Evidence does. And right now, there isn't any. If you have any information about the disappearance of Gus Lamont, please contact South Australia Police or Crime Stoppers Australia. Your information could be the key to solving this case. If you found this documentary informative, please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Desk, and share it with others. The more people who know about Gus, the better chance we have of eventually finding answers. And please, be kind. Remember that behind this case is a real family experiencing real pain. They deserve compassion, not conspiracy theories. They deserve privacy, not harassment. They deserve to grieve without judgment. Thank you for listening to this investigation into the disappearance of Gus Lamont. I'm your host from Cold Case Desk. Until next time, stay informed, stay compassionate, and never forget that every cold case represents a human being who deserves justice.